before the war had a sound, before sirens screamed, before the sky learned how to burn cities, there was ordinary life. A small German town, late 1930s, clean streets, quiet mornings, church bells instead of explosions. The family lived in a modest house with white walls and a wooden door that creaked softly every time it opened. Nothing special, nothing important to history, and that was the point. The father worked long hours, coming home with tired hands and a calm face. The mother kept the house alive. Meals, warmth, routine. The children played outside, unaware that history was already moving toward them. They argued about small things. Shoes left outside, cold soup, homework unfinished. No one argued about survival, because survival wasn't a concern yet. At night, the family sat together, listening to the radio, news from faraway places, political speeches, tensions that sounded serious, but distant. Wars had always been something adults talked about in the past tense. Last time, years ago, never again. The children believed that. They believed adults when they said, "It won't reach us." But war doesn't ask permission. Slowly, changes crept in. Shops began closing earlier. Men whispered more than they spoke. Posters appeared on walls. Bold words, sharp promises. The father noticed first. He stopped smiling when the radio played. He stared longer at the streets outside the window. He counted food more carefully. The mother felt it next. Neighbors talked less. Laughter became rare. Fear hid behind polite conversations. The children sensed it last. Children always do. They noticed their parents' silence. They noticed the way adults flinched at sudden noises. They noticed how nights felt longer. Still, life continued. Birthdays were celebrated. Bread was shared. Hope quietly survived in routine. But history was already writing its opening line. And this family, with no uniform, no weapon, no power, was about to be dragged into a war they never chose. The war did not know their names yet, but soon it would know their address. The war did not arrive with soldiers at first. It arrived with sound, a distant rumble, then another, until the sky itself seemed to crack open. At first, the family believed it would pass. Wars always happened somewhere else. Not here, not to ordinary people. But that night, the sirens screamed for the first time. The father froze mid-step. The mother pulled the children close without saying a word. They did not know where to run, only that they must run now. They rushed down into the basement, a place once used to store potatoes and coal. It smelled of damp walls and old earth. That place, meant for food, suddenly became the line between life and death. Above them, the first bombs fell. The walls shook like they were breathing. Dust rained from the ceiling. Every explosion felt closer than the last. The youngest child covered his ears and cried silently, because even crying felt dangerous. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. The family sat pressed together in the dark, listening to the city being torn apart piece by piece. The father counted explosions in his head. The mother whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. The children learned fear before they learned understanding. When silence finally returned, it wasn't comforting. It was suspicious. Carefully, the father climbed the stairs and opened the door. The street he knew was gone. Houses were broken open like cracked shells. Windows shattered. Smoke drifted through the air like a heavy fog. Neighbors stood outside, staring at ruins that used to be their homes. No one cried loudly. Shock had stolen their voices. That night, the family did not sleep in beds again. They returned to the basement, because beds were near windows, and windows invited death. Days passed, then weeks. The basement became their world. The children forgot the sound of birds. They forgot the color of the sky. They learned to recognize danger by vibration alone. Food became a problem. Rations were small. Bread was divided carefully. Crumbs counted like treasure. The father skipped meals without telling anyone. The mother noticed anyway. Parents always do. One evening, the oldest child asked a question that cut deeper than any bomb. Will this ever end? No one answered. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know. The war had entered their home without knocking, and it was not planning to leave soon. Hunger does not arrive suddenly. It starts quietly. At first, meals simply became smaller. One slice of bread instead of two. Soup made thinner with more water than vegetables. No one complained. Complaining felt dangerous, like tempting fate. Winter came early that year. Cold slipped through broken windows and thin walls, settling into bones and refusing to leave. The basement, once only a shelter from bombs, now became protection from the freezing nights above. Food lines stretched longer every day. The children stood in them for hours, clutching ration cards like fragile promises. Sometimes the line moved. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the food ran out before it was their turn. On those days, no one cried in public. Crying wasted energy. The youngest child began to change first. His cheeks grew hollow. His laughter disappeared. He stopped asking questions. Children should ask questions. Silence meant hunger had reached deeper than the stomach. The mother learned new skills. How to make a meal from almost nothing. How to stretch a potato into hope. How to smile while lying. She always said, "I already ate." She hadn't. The father traded what little he had left. A watch, old tools, memories turned into currency. Each trade felt like tearing a piece of life away. But hunger didn't care about pride. Outside, the city decayed. Bombed buildings were stripped bare by civilians searching for anything useful. Wood, metal, cloth, even ruins were no longer safe. Disease followed hunger like a shadow. Coughs echoed in shelters. Fever spread quietly. Medicine became a rumor from another time. One night, the sirens didn't sound. There were no bombs, just cold and hunger, and the slow realization that survival wasn't about bravery anymore. It was about endurance. The father collapsed one evening while climbing the stairs, not from injury, not from bombs, from weakness. The children watched silently as the mother helped him up. Fear locked behind her eyes. That was the night they understood something terrifying. You could do everything right and still lose. War was no longer something happening outside. It was inside their bodies now, in their stomachs, in their bones, in their breath. Hunger had learned their names, and it wasn't leaving. The nights became longer, not because the clocks changed, but because the blackouts swallowed everything. Windows were covered. Candles were forbidden. Even whispers were measured, cautious, as though sound itself could summon death. Outside, the city had vanished under darkness. Bombers roared above, invisible in the black sky. Each vibration, each distant thump, rattled the walls and hearts inside the basement. Fear became a constant companion. The children learned it first, their eyes wide in the dark, hearing footsteps above stairs that might not even be human. The father told them stories to keep courage alive. Fairy tales turned grim, because reality had crept into every word. The mother hummed songs that seemed older than the war itself, but even the music could not chase the shadows away. Then came the first real loss. A neighbor, an old man who always shared bread when he could, was taken by the bombs in the night. Not a scratch on the house remained, but the man's life was gone, erased like chalk on a blackboard. No one dared cry openly. Tears were hidden against clothing, pressed into hands, swallowed with breath. The children asked questions, questions adults could barely answer. Why did he go? Will it happen to us? Silence stretched long and suffocating. Blackouts taught them to see without seeing, to move without moving, to listen without sound. Every shadow became a threat, every creak a possible enemy. Every night the fear learned new shapes. Food was scarcer now. Rations were divided even thinner. The mother cooked the last scraps of potatoes into soup, and each spoonful tasted like despair mixed with memory. Sleep was a luxury. Every night the family counted each heartbeat, listened for the vibrations of bombs, and hoped not to be discovered by death that moved above like a predator. Yet, amidst the darkness, small acts of courage bloomed. A child offered half of his meager ration to a neighbor's child. The mother whispered encouragement into trembling hands. The father, despite exhaustion, taught the children how to move quietly, how to survive without making a sound. The basement had become their entire world, and in that world, life and death were neighbors. By the time the blackouts ended, if they ever truly ended, the family had changed, not grown stronger, not braver, just different, marked by the war, marked by fear, marked by the realization that innocence had been lost forever. The world above their basement had changed forever. Where once streets had laughter, there was now silence. Where once windows reflected sunlight, there were only jagged holes, shattered glass, and smoke curling into the sky like twisted fingers. The family stepped outside for the first time in days. Each step was cautious. Every echo from the cobblestones could mean danger. They saw neighbors who had survived, some with empty eyes, some carrying nothing but memories and fear. A man muttered words that made no sense, and a woman clutched her children so tightly her fingers left marks in their hair. The family kept close to walls. They avoided open spaces. Every broken building became both a warning and a potential hiding place. Above, the sky was a constant threat. Bombers flew silently, waiting for any target. Anti-aircraft guns rattled like metal beasts waking from slumber. And yet, life demanded movement. Food had run out long ago. Breadcrumbs were treasures. The mother scavenged scraps from ruined markets. The father traded tools and memories for potatoes and stale vegetables. Even survival required cleverness. Trading kindness, hiding hope, bartering life itself. The children had learned to walk silently, to speak in whispers, to recognize danger in the shape of smoke, the shadow of a tree, the sound of a footstep. One day they found a cat, thin and shivering, near a collapsed bakery. The children tried to feed it bread, but the cat ran away, too afraid, just like them. In that moment, the children understood that fear was not just their own. It was universal. Nights were worse. Silence was broken by distant screams. The rumble of bombs was a constant lullaby. Even when bombs did not fall, the family's nerves were taut, waiting for something that might never come, or might come at any moment. And then came the sound that froze them more than bombs ever could. The sound of someone crying. Not children, not the old, adults, the grown-ups who had promised protection. The father led the children away. The mother clutched them. Fear was heavier than any physical wound. By the time the sun rose, the streets were empty. Smoke still drifted. The smell of dust, fire, and fear hung over everything. Yet, in the rubble, small sparks of hope appeared. A neighbor shared a small can of soup. Another offered shoes that no longer fit. Humanity survived even in ruins, quietly, stubbornly, like grass growing through cracked concrete. For the family, survival was no longer just about hiding in basements. It was about walking through the wreckage, step by step, learning to endure the storms above, and finding fragments of life worth holding on to, even when the world seemed to have vanished. Winter came like a thief in the night. The city, already scarred by bombs and fear, now wore a blanket of frost. Snow covered the ruins, hiding the sharp edges of shattered walls, but not the scars in the hearts of those who walked among them. The family had survived raids, hunger, and smoke, but the cold was different. It didn't scream. It didn't thunder. It crept inside clothing, under blankets, into bones. Even the basement, once a sanctuary, was not safe from the freezing night. Wood was scarce. Firewood scarcer. Heat became a memory they longed for but could not afford. Illness followed quickly. A cough turned into fever, a fever into weakness. The children, once lively, now whispered and trembled in corners. Even the mother, strong and enduring, struggled to keep herself upright. The father rationed what little medicine they had. Every spoonful, every bandage, every makeshift remedy was precious. Yet some nights he held his son's shivering body and whispered prayers that sounded hollow even to him. Outside, the streets were silent, except for the crunch of snow underfoot. The wind carried the ghosts of bombs, the echoes of screams, the stench of smoke. Neighbors were gone. Some dead, some relocated, some vanished into the endless war. Every day, survival became a calculation, a negotiation with frost, hunger, and illness. The children learned a harsh lesson. Life wasn't about playing, laughing, or imagining the future. Life was enduring the present. Small victories, a warm cup of water, a slice of bread, the mother's gentle smile, became monumental. One evening, the youngest child asked softly, "Will it ever stop?" The mother's eyes glistened with tears. She did not answer. There was no truth she could give, only hope she could fake. The father, silent as ever, taught them another lesson. Keep moving, keep eating, keep hiding. One day it will be enough. But winter tested them. Snow clogged the streets. Ration lines became treacherous. Every trip outside risked frostbite or worse. And yet humanity flickered in small acts. Neighbors sharing wood, a stranger giving a bit of sugar, a mother comforting a child who was not her own. The family survived. Not because the world was kind, not because war was fair. They survived because they learned to endure, to hide, to move quietly, to ration, to bargain, to hope. And in the darkest nights, when illness and frost coiled around them like serpents, they realized something terrifying. Survival was not living. It was fighting the world every day, and winning only by minute. By now, the family knew fear intimately. It was no longer an abstract idea whispered in bedtime stories. It was a living, breathing entity, stalking them in the streets, in the basements, in every shadow. Trust became dangerous. Neighbors they had known for years were suddenly strangers. Conversations were measured. A simple word could betray you. A smile could be weaponized. The father once helped a man find shelter after a bombing. Days later, he discovered the man had reported a neighbor hiding rationed food, food that could have fed children. Even kindness had a price now. The children learned to watch, to listen without being heard, to understand body language, to notice hesitation, to read expressions like an unreadable map. Play became impossible. Laughter was a luxury they could no longer afford. Outside, the war carved deeper scars. Bombs fell closer. Smoke lingered longer. The streets were littered with debris, broken toys, and abandoned memories. The mother kept a small journal hidden under floorboards. It was a diary of survival, of counting each day as a victory. Each entry detailed rations, illnesses, threats, but also tiny miracles. A warm loaf shared, a roof still over their heads, the children still alive. One evening, a neighbor knocked. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. She whispered about food hidden in a nearby ruin, but warned, "Take it, but don't get caught. Soldiers are watching." The father hesitated. The decision was life or death. Risking exposure could mean execution, but starving children could not wait. They ventured out silently that night. The cold bit at their fingers and noses. The ruined streets creaked beneath each step. Shadows stretched longer than they should. Every corner was a trap waiting to happen. A soldier's voice rang out. He paused near a building. For a heartbeat, the family froze. The mother clutched the children, holding them to the ground, hearts hammering. The soldier moved on. They survived. Inside the ruin, they found a cache of food. Stale bread, potatoes, even a can of sugar. The children cried silently. The mother whispered prayers of thanks. The father nodded, not smiling, but feeling the weight of temporary relief. But they knew this relief was fragile. Tomorrow could bring betrayal. The day after, another raid. Another chance at death. Trust was now a weapon sharper than any bomb, and fear was a companion they could not shed. By the end of that night, the family understood the unspoken truth of survival. Cleverness outweighed courage. Observation outweighed strength. Silence outweighed speech. The shadows of war were no longer just outside the basement. They had moved inside minds, inside hearts, and the family. They would have to outsmart death itself every single day, just to remain alive. The war had taken everything: homes, streets, friends, even the innocence of children. But it could not take human ingenuity. As the city lay in ruins, small, hidden networks began to form. Neighbors who survived raids exchanged whispered messages, smuggled food, and hid children from soldiers. Every act was quiet, unseen, and extremely dangerous. The family joined cautiously. The father learned to pass along warnings about patrols. The mother hid small caches of medicine and bread. The children became scouts, bringing word from one safe house to another. Each mission was a lesson in risk and observation. Every shadow might be a soldier. Every friendly face could be a trap. And yet they persisted. The family witnessed incredible acts of courage. An old man, blind in one eye, led children through alleyways to safe basements. A mother hid infants in empty barrels while trading soup with strangers. A young woman, barely older than the children, carried secret messages between occupied neighborhoods, risking execution at every step. The family learned how to navigate this dangerous world, memorizing rooftops and alleyways, recognizing the silhouettes of soldiers from afar, listening to the faintest sounds of movement, smiling, nodding, pretending while hiding terror inside. It was exhausting. It was terrifying, but it was life. During one particularly long night, the father guided the children through streets recently bombed. Rubble blocked paths. Smoke choked the air. Shouts echoed from somewhere far away. But they moved silently, carefully. Shadows among shadows. They reached a safe basement. Inside, a small group of neighbors waited. They shared food, warmth, and information. For the first time in months, hope flickered. Hope was dangerous, but it was worth the risk. Over the following weeks, the family participated in small acts of resistance, smuggling food to hiding families, warning children of upcoming raids, sharing medicine, helping repair damaged homes in secrecy. Every act reinforced a crucial truth. Even in a world dominated by fear, war, and death, humanity could survive quietly. The children began to learn something profound. Courage is not always about fighting. Sometimes, courage is simply moving forward, keeping yourself and others alive against impossible odds. And as winter slowly melted into spring, the family saw their city in small, broken glimpses of rebirth. A tree stubbornly growing among rubble, a neighbor planting vegetables in a ruined courtyard, the sun rising over streets that had long been shadows. Even in war, life finds ways to persist. By the 9th year of the war, survival had become both instinct and curse. The streets were silent, yet full of echoes, echoes of lives lost, screams long silenced, memories of neighbors who would never return. The family walked cautiously through their neighborhood, now almost unrecognizable. Buildings were reduced to walls, chimneys, and jagged stones. The air carried the bitter tang of smoke and death. Each day brought a new reckoning with reality. Food was scarce. Illness lingered. Cold had left scars. But the heaviest burden was seeing who did not survive. Friends who had once laughed with them were gone. Neighbors who shared meals had been taken in raids or succumbed to illness. The father counted faces on his fingers, feeling guilt each time one slipped away. The children did not fully understand why some families vanished. All they knew was absence and the silence of spaces once filled with life. The family had learned to move, hide, and negotiate. But with survival came choices that weighed on them every day. Giving away food meant risking their own hunger. Hiding in shadows meant leaving others exposed. Stealing from ruins meant moral compromise. Even small victories felt like Pyrrhic wins. They survived, yes, but at a cost invisible to outsiders. One night, the mother whispered to the children, "Every face we remember, that is why we live, not for ourselves, but for them." The children began to understand. Survival was not only self-preservation, it was witnessing the past, carrying memories, and honoring those who were gone. They encountered other survivors who had made impossible choices. A boy, not much older than the eldest child, had stolen from his own home to survive. A woman, now haggard, had given her last bit of bread to a stranger instead of feeding her children. The family's understanding of right and wrong had blurred in the crucible of war. Through it all, the father reminded them, survival is not winning. Survival is enduring. Remember that. Winter returned, bringing frost and snow that covered the bodies of the forgotten and the streets they had once played in. Yet even under this frozen silence, resilience persisted. Neighbors shared stories, no longer of trivial matters but of who had fallen, who had hidden, and who had survived. The family listened, learning that their struggle was shared, and in that shared suffering there was a strange, fragile hope. The war had taken much, but it had not extinguished the human spirit. Even amid ruin, starvation, and loss, the family discovered something profound. To survive is to remember, to endure, and to continue walking forward, one fragile step at a time. The war finally ended, not with a whisper, but with the tremors of surrender and distant cheers. The streets, still scarred with rubble, now witnessed a new kind of movement. Children, who had known only fear and hiding, peeked into daylight with wide, uncertain eyes. Adults emerged slowly, cautiously, from basements, ruined homes, and hidden corners, hesitant to trust that the guns had truly fallen silent. The family walked through their destroyed neighborhood, hearts pounding, stomachs still empty, yet somehow alive. The father knelt among the rubble, touching the broken walls and shattered furniture. "It's all still here, and yet it's gone," he whispered. The mother held her children close, tears freezing on her cheeks in the early morning frost. The children, finally able to speak, laughed softly, uncertain if the sound was safe. Freedom was strange and fragile. The war had stolen everything, innocence, friends, neighbors, homes. But it had left something crucial: life itself, stubborn and enduring. In the following days, they encountered other survivors, faces etched with grief and relief. People who had lost everything but had found each other in the ruins. Communities slowly formed. Neighbors shared rations, stories, and hopes for the future. The children helped rebuild homes, carrying bricks and hope alike. The mother organized small meals, teaching the children to share and to care once more. The father began to repair the old family home, hammering boards and nailing roofs, a symbol of resilience. Yet the scars ran deep. Memories of betrayal, hunger, illness, and the constant fear of death lingered. Some nights the children cried for friends they had lost, for families who never returned, for laughter that had been stolen. But life, stubborn and persistent, demanded forward motion. The family planted a small garden in the ruins. Tiny sprouts pushed through the soil, fragile but unyielding. It became a symbol. No matter the destruction, life finds a way. They attended gatherings where stories were shared aloud, of survival, of courage, of ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of quiet heroism. The father listened, the mother cried, and the children absorbed lessons about human strength, about empathy, about hope against impossible odds. And finally, one evening, as the sun set behind broken rooftops and smoke-choked skies, the father spoke softly. We survived not because we were strong, not because we were brave, but because we refused to let fear decide our lives. We endured, and now we begin again. The children, now taller and wiser than their age, nodded silently. The mother smiled faintly, tears streaming. The family looked at the horizon, where light finally began to pierce the darkness. It was fragile, it was incomplete, it was human, but it was hope. And in that hope, they found the courage to live again. The war had taken much, but it could not take the spirit of survival, the resilience of family, and the flicker of humanity that burned quietly in the ruins of their lives. Even as the city lay in ashes, the family understood something essential. Survival is not about weapons or walls. It is about endurance, courage, and the will to continue living. The sun rose over the broken city. Smoke lingered. Rubble remained. But life, stubborn, fragile, and beautiful life, continued.